Hi, this is Dr. Stephen Seiler. I am speaking to you from Norway, where it's still winter right now, but spring is coming. And on April 2nd, we'll be doing a new webinar with my friends down in Australia, Pogo Physio and Brad Beer and his team. The title of this webinar will be Durability and High-Intensity Repeatability in Endurance Training. And it'll be a 3-hour event with sessions on understanding the big picture for long-term development, and then discussing how to program and execute the long, low-intensity sessions, how long, what intensity. Then we'll discuss high-intensity training, whether to intensify or extend those interval sessions, and why. Then we'll discuss the training monitoring process to make sure that the training is sustainable and the balance between work and rest is being achieved. And then we'll open it all up for questions so that you can make sure that you come away with an understanding of what I'm trying to get across. So join me on April 2nd. I think it's going to be a good Saturday. Looking forward to speaking with you.
That's right, we are so excited to be bringing Dr. Stephen Seiler to you again in 2022 for another wonderful learning opportunity with the Durability and High-Intensity Repeatability in Endurance Training live stream. Tickets are available now from just $49 per registrant, including a post-event recording of the live stream if you are unable to make the Australian time zone, and a copy of Dr. Seiler's presentation via PDF. If 2020's live stream event is anything to go by, you are in for a real learnings treat. So jump over to physicalperformanceshow.com, secure your tickets. There's only several weeks to go. Do not miss Dr. Stephen Seiler's live stream, Durability and High-Intensity Repeatability in Endurance Training, taking place on the 2nd of April 2022.
Hi, I'm Eric Hegedus, and I am the Program Director for Tufts University Physical Therapy. I have previously led Duke Physical Therapy and High Point University's physical therapy programs. I am a running researcher with about 100 publications, but more than that, I am a clinician who is proud and happy to be talking about returning to running on the physical performance broadcasts.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
Tufts, 10 meters left. 3 minutes too good. The crowd roaring. Freeman wins gold.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go.
Welcome to episode 316 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar's world-leading GPS and heart rate monitors. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. We do this across a range of our different episodes, interest editions, learnings catch-up episodes, featured performers, and of course our very popular expert editions. Now, hot off the back of last week's featured performer episode featuring 8 times world triathlon champion, endurance sporting legend, Javier Gomez, this week get ready for some great learnings from Professor Eric Hegedus around returning to running post-injury. In 2021, Professor Eric Hegedus, along with a team of his colleagues, published a wonderful scientific paper in the Sports Medicine Journal titled Comprehensive Return to Competitive Distance Running, a Clinical Commentary. And it's this paper that we glean Professor Hegedus's insights from as he shares today around how to get return to run programs written effectively to ensure that the athlete is psychologically ready and physiologically ready to return to the demands of participation and sport and performance. It's an area that is really grey in terms of the science. Perhaps you'd say it's more of an art than a science, but Professor Hegedus and his team have done a great job in outlining 6 phases that clinicians and runners returning post-injury can pay attention to. Now, by way of bio, Professor Hegedus is prolific. He's the founding program director for the Tufts Doctor of Physical Therapy program in Phoenix, Arizona. Professor Hegedus was previously the founding chair of High Point University's Department of Physical Therapy. He has authored over 85 peer-reviewed publications, a textbook now in its 2nd edition and translated into 5 languages, and 7 book chapters. Dr. Hegedus has received multiple awards, including the American Physical Therapy Association's James A. Gould Excellence in Orthopaedic Teaching Award, and has been a 4-time winner of the Excellence in Physical Therapy Teaching Award. Dr. Hegedus is a founder and director of Targeted Enhanced Athletic Movement, a community-based health and wellness program designed to improve athletic performance and prevent injury in active people. So you are going to want to have your pen and paper ready for this expert edition, Return to Run programming with Professor Eric Hegedus. Professor Eric Hegedus, welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Brad, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, Eric, I've been meaning to reach out for some time. September 2021, yourself and colleagues there in the US, Tufts University, released a wonderful paper, scientific paper that is titled Comprehensive Return to Competitive Distance Running, a Clinical Commentary. And I first heard about it through your US-based colleagues there at the Mountain Land Running, Brian Heiderscheit and co. And I thought, what a fantastic paper to feature for the Physical Performance Show listenership. So can you take us through, before we talk about the paper, just a little bit of your genesis as a practitioner, as an academic and head of school there at Tufts University? How did this all start for you?
So sure. So I started out as a clinician who didn't know what he wanted to do. And so I worked in an acute care hospital from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And then at 3:30 in the afternoon until 7 at night, I would go and work another job at the sports medicine center. And so, I knew I loved physical therapy, but didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was really trying to not, because I was a college basketball athlete. So I was trying not to be that stereotypical jock that just sticks with what he knows. And I ended up right back where in the thing I love, all these years later, 30 some years later of seeing lots of athletes. And then when I was at High Point for about 10 years there, the majority of my clients were all distance athletes. And so this paper was sort of born of that passion for working with distance athletes and also seeing a gap in the standard of care. And so that also drives me as a researcher. If you look at my research, it's sort of to the outsider might seem a little all over the board. It's in musculoskeletal and sports, but it might seem a little scattered. But the defining thing for me is, because I still see patients on a regular basis, is I get frustrated by things I don't understand, or I get frustrated by a lack of standard of care. And I'm driven to then be more efficient and better, which then leads me to deep dive into the literature. And I know you're similar because I saw your notes on my paper, which were excellent. So it leads me into a deep dive, and then it causes me to produce research, which is first of all sort of like a systematic review, because you've done it anyway by diving into the literature. And then after you dive in the literature, it's sort of imperative that you gather data on that patient population you see and see if you can't improve the outcomes. And as far as being a leader of a couple of programs, now 3 programs, I think, Duke, High Point, and now Tufts University, that just sort of goes with getting older. You stay in it long enough and people promote you.
Well, I think you're very very modest and humble, but one thing jumped out there is that you're driven to improve outcomes, and I think that's the nature of a clinician at heart. It is the driving force. There's got to be a better way to do this. As a practitioner of not quite as many years as yourself, Eric, you're a bit of a role model for me, I must say. I have been, one of the areas I've been most frustrated with in working often in endurance sports, triathlon running, distance running, is this very topic that you've explored with your colleagues, and that is returning to running post-injury. It seems like such a clinical dark art because, therapists A, B, C, D will all likely approach it differently. It's times it feels like it's a bit of a, in quotes, dog's breakfast, what happens with this. So this is such a great 17-page document that is not a recipe. It's not a protocol, as you say. It's a guideline of things to think about to encourage athlete, practitioner, and coaches to give it a little bit more thought. And you've certainly added some flavour to my approach through this paper. So shall we explore it here, Eric? Before we do, though, just setting the scene, we all know running-related injuries are common. Your paper gives a little bit of an introduction. Just how common are they? So
I think you've taken the notes on this, and I don't have the numbers memorized, but it's probably, depending on whether you're a recreational or an elite athlete, somewhere in the 10 to almost 75% range of avid runners who get injured each year.
And those common injuries that you see, you've had so many years treating athletes. What are your top, conditions that you're typically seeing in these athletes?
So, according to literature, at least, the most common injuries are, number one, bone stress injuries, and people call those different things, right? You can call it a stress reaction, a stress fracture, shin splints, tibial stress syndrome. Those are all sort of pseudonyms for the range of pathologies that go with bone stress injuries. There is patellofemoral pain is a common one, plantar fasciitis is a common one, and Achilles tendinopathy is a common one, and one that I certainly saw more of when every runner felt like they had to contribute to or convert themselves to a minimalist shoe and a 4-foot strike. And then what we saw was a lot of Achilles issues.
Yeah, there was a worldwide increase with the minimalist trend, wasn't there, right? Everyone shifting onto the 4-foot and loading up the plantar flexors or the calf, if you like.
Yes.
We saw that in Australia too, don't worry. Kept us all busy. So there are very common running-related injuries, and I doubt that there's anyone listening in that at some point hasn't had to work some or a few of those injuries. And when we talk about return to running, just to give that a better description, how would you describe return to running?
Return to running. So the section of rehabilitation that this paper addresses that I thought was lacking is when I was first seeing athletes. Now, keep in mind, this is now 12 years ago when I first started really devoting myself to running athletes. What I saw was practitioners saying, well, if you hurt, stop running, and then we'll start running again when you're pain-free. And so what I saw happening was there was all sort of very localized treatment to the Achilles, to the patellofemoral joint. Maybe if people got creative, they strengthened the hip in addition to those local things. And then in the meantime, the person whose sole goal it is to be cardiorespiratory fit, more so than any other athlete, that cardiorespiratory fitness is absolutely dying while you work on these local things. And by the time you get them absolutely pain-free, if you've done nothing for their cardiorespiratory fitness, you send them back perhaps in a pain-free fashion, but their season is lost. So an injury that takes 2 to 3 weeks to months, sometimes 6 weeks to heal, their entire season is lost. And the distance athletes that I work with in college, sometimes more than one season, because they competed year-round. These distance athletes, they went from an indoor season to an outdoor season to a cross-country season. And all of those things were stacked one after the other. And so here we would return them and say, well, we did a great job. And then they would go back and we'd find out that in fact weren't competing and the whole season was lost. And so it was just beyond me that an Achilles tendinopathy might cost the athlete a season or two. I just thought that was such a poor standard of care that and I was joined in this, of course, I worked in a great lab with a biomechanist, Kevin Ford, and with an exercise physiologist, Jamie Smoliga, and we were like, this is unacceptable. So that's the segment that this paper fills then, is how do we keep people whose business is cardiorespiratory fitness, how do we maintain that cardiorespiratory fitness while we're rehabilitating the damaged tissue?
So how do we maintain the cardiorespiratory fitness or cardiovascular fitness whilst improving, progressing the physiological healing of said injury, bone stress, tendinopathy, tendon, muscle strain?
Exactly.
And it seems like so hard to believe that this could not be something that's been done better. I often sort of get frustrated when someone has been given well-meaning advice to, as you mentioned there, Eric, clinically, just to stop running. And look, there's certainly times when that's indicated. Bone stress injuries obviously are a time when that's absolutely critical. But for other conditions, it's about trying to find that happy workload. And it really frustrates me as a clinician when people sometimes take heed of that and just stop, and they might have 2 weeks out, 3, 4, 5 plus. And the whole time, as you say, they're deconditioning not just cardiovascularly, but also their local tissues. And yes, the pain may cease. We'd expect that, but it opens up another raft of concerns, reduction in performance, as you say. They're behind the 8 ball in terms of their season goals and timelines, and then also their heightened risk of re-injury. So this paper does a great job in giving a framework. It's a 6-part or 6-phase framework, Eric, to help practitioners in the field. It is about the competitive distance runner, but obviously what the top end do can filter down into the recreational athletes, Eric. So it's a 6-phase guideline that yourself and colleagues have recommended. Can you just talk us through the headlines of the 6 phases, then we'll dive into them?
Sure. So because this is a guideline and not a recipe, if you wanted to have 4 phases, that would be fine with me. And if you wanted to have 8 phases, that would be fine with me. For the athletes out there listening, this is not something that you should take on by yourself. That's not the intent of this paper. The intent of this paper is to have you working with a professional like Brad or a group of professionals that help you through this. But the way we designed it was phase 1 was actually all cross training. And then phase 2, less than 25%, but sometimes even less than 5% of your exercise training volume within a workout was actually running. And then, as those phases increase, you just see the numbers increase, right? From 25 to 50, greater than 50, 60 to 100%. So you're slowly increasing the amount of time spent running on land. And so I think that's really the keys to the progression. And it begs a question of, well, how do you know that you're ready to progress to the next step, right? And besides successful completion of the planned workout, and we would always work with the coaches, right? We would at baseline establish some key goals and some key timelines also. So if we knew conference was in X number of weeks, we worked back from conference competition. Or if we knew that a very important half marathon was coming up, we would work back from that and say, okay, you really need to be ready for full competition in 3.5 months. So let's back down from there and decide what loading we want to do. And then, so besides the longer term goals, we would, of course, adapt based on knowing the athlete and knowing the athlete physiologically, but also knowing their cardiorespiratory fitness and also knowing where they were from a psychological standpoint. Because, of course, these injuries all come with great setbacks there. When we tell you, just don't run, for a college athlete, you've removed them from their social network because they're no longer practicing with the team. They have fear of re-injury. They start to doubt whether they can ever go back. And they also start to doubt whether, when they go back, whether they will be as good as they were, or will they perform miserably and let their teammates down. So there's a whole realm of psychosocial things too that we use to help progress people through this and find out where they are on the spectrum. And so that's what we would do. And of course, we would throw in some physical performance tests. We would throw in some cardiorespiratory testing along the way. All of those things we would use to judge, is this athlete ready for the next step? And then as physios, there's some basic things that we look at, right? What is your pain level? how irritable is this pain? And irritable to me means there's a difference between you ran for the first time on land, your pain increased from 2 out of 10 to 4 out of 10, but an hour later, you went back down to 2 out of 10 versus, well, I went from 2 out of 10 to 7 out of 10 after running, and it's stayed this way for 48 hours. That's a very much more an irritable issue. And so we would progress those irritable issues more slowly and the less irritable issues more aggressively. So it is that. It's why it can't be a protocol. It's why it has to be a guideline, because you have to take all of those factors into account as you progress the athlete. And that means you need a professional to help you do it. It is not something you should embark on the athlete as your own. And I would argue, nor should you embark on it as a PT alone, nor should you embark on it as a coach alone. There should be some great communication so everybody is talking about these things.
There's a lot that you've just shared there, Eric. Just to recap, these are guidelines. It's not a protocol. There's 6 phases. There could be 4. There could be 8. It's about progressing based on considerations such as pain levels, irritability of the condition, the psychological readiness of the athlete, their ability to recover. And then a key point that we shouldn't gloss over is what you just touched on at the end, and that is that there needs to be defined goals and defined team members that are going to help this athlete do the journey. Going it alone, whether it's the athlete or the therapist, can be fraught with danger. More minds on this is always a better thing. So defining the goals, that's, like you said, fairly commonsensical. Reverse engineer from said event, said performance expectation. How much time is there? Obviously, the longer the better, but it's not always that easy. But in terms of quantifying the load for the progressions, before we dive back into the phases a little bit more, this was one of the key themes that emerged through your paper. It parallels with one of your US colleagues. It seems like all the great running research comes out of the US, I must say, Eric. But Max Piquet, who published some great work around it with Rich Willey, moving beyond weekly mileage, quantifying training load. What a doozy!
Yes.
It seems, how is an athlete, coach, team? What are some ideas around how to best quantify the training load? Because we all know that it's not just about weekly mileage or minutes.
So this is one of the hottest topics in sports right now, is quantifying load and what the definition of load is. And I know you know this well, Brad, because it's been on your podcast and you understand this stuff very well. There are a couple of ways. There is a very high-tech way of monitoring that, and lots of companies all over the world now have wearable devices that are helping you, trying to track your load, but also your hydration and your mood levels and your, you name it, right? So but that technology is still very expensive for the most part. You can argue that you can wear a wristwatch that tracks some of that stuff, and that's better than nothing, but how accurate some of those things are is called into question. And usually the less expensive things are less accurate, and the more expensive things are more accurate, but sometimes become cost prohibitive. So that's one side, is this high-tech approach. The other side is something called training impulse. And the reason that we settled on this for the paper, and this was really the work of Jamie Smoliga, who was the exercise physiologist, is you need something that's simple and easy for the average human being, who is maybe a recreational, but an avid recreational runner, to quantify their load. And so most people just say, well, I ran 5 miles yesterday and I ran 7 miles today, and so that quantifies my load, right? And the answer to that question is yes, that does quantify your load, but you're missing a key component there, and that is the intensity of your workout. You could have run a very hard, and for a recreational runner, let's say that's a 6-minute mile for a recreational runner, a very hard 5 miles. And then you can turn around the next day and run the same 5 miles and run it at a 10-minute mile pace, which is much easier for you. And those are not the same load. And so training impulse gets you to multiply something called the rate of perceived exertion. And this is your own estimate of how hard that workout was times the time that you spent exercising. And so between those two, you're getting distance gets incorporated within those two things of intensity and time spent. And it also is an adaptable measure. Not only is it easy, but it's adaptable. It's adaptable because sometimes we're guilty of overtraining, right? We've been pushing it too hard. We haven't been sleeping well. Our eating's been off. Likely you will rate a workout under those conditions as far more intense than you would the same workout if you were well rested, eating well, and less stressed, right? So within that TRIMP is that self-rating of perceived exertion is a very important thing. But again, the formula itself is easy. It is your rate of perceived exertion on a 0 to 10 scale, really 1 to 10 scale. 10 is the most difficult, times the amount of time that you spent working out. And the other thing is that does is when you're doing stage 1, let's say, and you're cross-training, that same measure of load works in cross-training, where you look at time and difficulty of the workout.
So it encaptures some of the efforts to, like we said, not let an athlete that's injured, a running athlete that's injured, fitness fall away to nothing just by stopping it. It also allows for some quantification of work being done in that cross-training period, which is so key to the recovery journey. And as an example there, just to simplify it, let's say, Eric, you ran for 40 minutes today, and it was a fairly casual run, chatting to colleagues on a lunch break, a 5 out of 10 for rating of perceived exertion, 5 by 40 minutes, that's 200 units of work under the training impulse, correct?
Correct.
And we've seen, it's certainly been nice to see training platforms, software, even the likes of, say, Strava, which we all know has some limitations, and there's Strava-related injuries and Stravanoia. but one of the nice updates to the program that I've noticed is, there's now a section for private notes where you can rate your rating of perceived exertion. And, so I think, generally, I'm not sure if you'd agree, there seems to be a rising awareness that it's not just mileage, it's not just, how many miles or kilometers did you run this week?
Yes. And I started a new hashtag with my son and my daughter-in-law, hashtag don't Strava me, because I exercise now for the pure enjoyment of it. I'm not competing anymore. They still are. They're doing half Ironmans and other sorts of triathlons, right? And so they're always Strava-ing, and I just said, "Don't Strava me."
Oh gosh, it's a whole new language and world. But there's lots of upsides here. So we've got the goals set. We understand about trying to quantify training load for this progression through the phases. Coming back to phase 1 here, Eric, return to participation. There's two, I guess, overarching umbrellas here: return to participating and then return to sport, which is, as it suggests, more performance related. But the early cross-training phase, I think one of the limitations that I can certainly see clinically is lack of creativity in how to keep this fitness up. People think, I can go water running. I heard you reference on a podcast, it might have been with the Mountain Land guys or Brodie Sharp from Australia, that you're not a big fan of water running, and nor am I. Can you just extrapolate on that?
Yeah, so I'll explain first why I'm not a fan of water running, and say when maybe I am. I am only a fan of water running in somebody who feels that need to exercise, but whose condition is so highly irritable that we can't do any other cross training. So it is absolutely my last effort, and it has to be somebody who's not in good shape. But if you look at bone stress injuries, right, that stress injury is only going to heal with the correct amount of loading, and you don't get that in a swimming pool. And so I think you have to get used to being on land, to bearing weight if you can. And so we were fortunate enough when we wrote this paper to have all sorts of options. We had weight altering treadmills. We had stationary bikes that quantified your load. We had rowing ergometers. We had a stair climbing machine that involved no impact. And then we look around and there's some old fashioned stuff that as you can tolerate more pounding, things like jump rope. We would do all sorts of creative things to keep the athlete from getting bored, and had some good success doing that, keeping them in shape, so to speak, and keeping them focused on progressing and not afraid to sort of compete with themselves. Because what I didn't want at the end is have an athlete who was in no pain, was doing cardiorespiratory training, but who we had never had once do a maximum effort activity. So that's an important thing with this cardiorespiratory training and testing. If you're gonna cross train, at some point in there, you need to tell them to go hard. You need to say, hey, look, you're gonna bike 40 kilometers today. Your goal is to get there as fast as you can. That's what I want you to do. I don't want you to mosey. I don't want you to have a sandwich and be on your phone. As fast as you can finish 40 kilometers, I want you to go. And because I think sometimes running athletes, specifically when working with them, see cross training as a surrender. Oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, and this isn't as hard. And I would say that the athletes that we worked with over the years started to see cross training as a way to maintain or improve their cardiorespiratory fitness while decreasing tissue load. And so I think it really switched in their brains of, oh no, I'm gonna keep cross training in my, even when I'm healthy, I'm gonna keep cross training in.
So much to offer the athlete returning from injury, and I think something that I think is a common mistake we can observe is, as you say, it's a surrender. Well, this is just easy, boring time on an elliptical or boring time on a bike, and yet there's a reluctance to go hard, as you say. You cite tests such as a Wingate test. Well, that's a lot of pain. A 4 kilometer cycle time trial, 40K cycle time trial, 20K cycle time trial. I guess it's incumbent on the team helping the athlete return to get creative, not be, in quotes, lazy with the this phase, and actually challenge the athlete.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, it's important from all that we talked about, cardiorespiratory and physiological, but it's hugely important from the psychological standpoint, right? Of the fact that they could push hard and not get re-injured, that they could compete with themselves. And so they're in the mind frame, these athletes are in the mind frame of competing, and to remove that makes them kind of lose their edge, so to speak, if I could use that terminology. And so this gets them sharpened again. When it comes time to go back to competition, they are loaded with self-efficacy. And if you don't approach it this way, you have an athlete who's returning with a lot of doubts about their ability to compete, about their ability to push themselves, about their ability to push themselves and not get re-injured. And that's a sort of a devastating way to return the athlete to competition, because they will lose and they will not have a great performance their first time back. And that's not what you want to send them back to.
Yeah, that psychological readiness, which is such a big part of this this commentary, Eric, is so important. Just on this cross-training topic, so we're not yet having an athlete run per se, either reduced body weight, anti-gravity treadmills, etc., or over ground here. This is pure cross-training. One of the things I liked is some of the schematics in the paper that come up with some creative ideas about multimodal training sessions. It doesn't just have to be a bike session. It can be a bike, potentially skip-in, treadmill, rowing ergometer. There's a whole bunch of different things you could throw into a workout, which, if the athlete has access to some of these bits of equipment, what a great idea.
Yeah, and this is Jamie Smoliga's, he's the exercise physiologist on the paper, but this is his creation. And in addition to being creative with the modality that you're using, treadmill versus stationary bike versus rowing ergometer, he was also very creative in mixing up moderate intensity, high intensity, low intensity, and sometimes within the same workout, where you would go hard on the rower, have a moderate workout on the stair climber, and then go back to the cycle and have an easy period, and then right back to intense. And, we were fortunate enough to get to experiment, if you will, not a true experimentation in a scientific sense, but we got an athlete who was a stellar high school runner, but the volume of training that she was doing didn't work for her body. So let me just say that again. The volume of training she was doing didn't work for her body. And at that point, 12 years ago, people were saying, well, if you don't run 90 miles a week, then you can't compete. You're not going to be a fit runner because some Olympic athlete did that, and people are not realizing that that's a rare bird. The Olympic athletes are rare people. Not everybody can run 90 miles a week and not break. So every time she got over a training load of 70 miles a week, she would break. She would get a bone stress injury. She would have tendinopathy. Her knee would start hurting. Her hip would start hurting. Her low back would start hurting. It was always something. And so what happened was the coach said, it's 3 years now, we've gotten little to nothing out of her. You guys get her. And so I would work on her sort of conventional musculoskeletal rehab, and Jamie Smoliga would take her and put her through these very creative workouts. And she never ran more over ground than 35 miles in a week. And we used all of these other creative ways to train her. And then her senior year, she competed, she PR'd several times, and she won a conference championship, all on 35 miles a week, because her body enjoyed the 35 miles a week, but broke as she got to higher mileages. So that's where this sort of very creative, let's use all of these modalities, let's vary the intensities, let's build the base without building the mileage, right? Let's build that cardiorespiratory fitness. And so Jamie gets all the credit for that. What a fun thing for us to do together, and really was the beginning of the genesis of this paper of, oh my God, this worked. And this worked to the extreme. This is now someone who's PRing on a fairly regular basis. Wow, there must be something to this. And that's what started our deep dive.
You're listening to Professor Eric Hegedus on this expert edition, Return to Run Programming, brought to you by Polar. Coming from the heart of the Nordics and with over 40 years of proven performance, Polar believe it all starts with heart. Polar's products simply give you the most accurate way to plan, train, and recover. Polar's Precision Prime heart rate technology is the most accurate way to plan and track your activity and recovery 24/7, 365. Born in the Nordics to beautiful designs, Polar's watches are built to withstand the toughest conditions and make sure you've got a stunning watch for any occasion. Polar's Training Load Insights allows you to explore the limits of your body so you can find out if you are training just right to improve your performance and reduce injury. And who doesn't want that? And with Nightly Recharge, you can truly understand and predict your recovery so that you can not only own the night, but win the day. If you feel like it's time to beat your best, then jump across to Shop Polar at polar.com to check out their all-new range. Support for today's show also comes from our great friends over in New Zealand, Earshots. Earshots Bluetooth headphones. Lock on, train on, and rock on with Earshots. Earshots have you covered for staying motivated while you train. Their patented magnetic ear clip means you can push your limits without being distracted by annoying cords or earbuds that fall out. Use the code PERFORMANCE, one word capitals, at earshots.com to enjoy 10% off your purchase. So that's performance at www.earshots.com for 10% off your purchase. For now, let's jump back with this week's Expert Edition guest, Professor Eric Hegedus, discussing return to run programming, what matters, and the mistakes to avoid. Eric, so let's not forget with cross-training endeavors, it doesn't have to stay to one modality, and it doesn't have to stay within that session to one intensity. It can be high intensity, moderate, easy, high, moderate. You can get creative, so have some fun with it and challenge the athlete. Phase 2, 3, as you said, there can be as many phases as you like, but phase 2 and 3, still in this return to participation framework, if you like. It's not yet turning on competition. It's basically just increasing training volume within a workout from, as you said, initially less than 25% to somewhere between 30 to 50% of a workout being some level of running. But just to clarify here, Eric, these aren't yet overground running sessions. Is that right? If people have access to some of these technologies, such as anti-gravity treadmills, etc.
Yeah, if they have access to things like that, then that's what you should be doing in the early phases, right? It's not full weight bearing, or in an athlete whose schedule was loaded and couldn't come into the lab to work on the reduced gravity treadmill, and this would drive them crazy at first, right? We would actually have them run for 60 seconds and begin it there. And they were like, God, that can't do any good. But again, we would just ask them to stick with us for a while. Just believe in what we were doing, which was hard in the beginning, but easier when our test subjects started winning conference championships. And sometimes that's what we would have her do. She would cross train like crazy. And then we would send her out and say, okay, we want you to run for 60 seconds. Now you can run as fast as you want to for the 60 seconds, but 60 seconds is your overland pounding workout for today. I think, look, you could make an argument. Does that really do any good from a loading standpoint? Nah, maybe not. But is it really healthy to feel that impact, to start working again on your mechanics, on your stride, on all of those things? Yeah, 60 seconds was enough to start working again on your return to form, to be more efficient of a runner. So that's what we would use that for.
Return to form. I like that phrase. And for the athlete that doesn't have access to some of these technologies, any suggestions for that athlete? I know you're not a huge fan of walk-run protocols in all their applications, but any suggestions, Eric?
Yeah, so I would qualify my statement. in a competitive athlete, I'm not sure that I'm always a fan of walk-run. They won't buy into that. They will buy in more to a heavy cross-training workout, an intense one, than they will into a walk-run program. Well, I mean, I'm not identifying who said this, but they would call the walk-run workouts in the early days a NARC workout. And I said, I don't know what that means. And they said, it's a non-athletic regular person workout. And so they weren't buying in, right? When they're giving it this sort of derogatory nickname, the competitive athletes weren't fans of that. I will say for the majority of the runners, though, who are recreational runners, I am a fan of walk run, because I think sometimes that's how you get sort of used to bearing weight and moving normally again. So, and if you don't have access to expensive things, walk run's a great way to go.
Yeah, no, it's great to clarify. And I think it's meeting the athlete where they are, the sort of person they are. I often see quite impulsive people, and they're going to have trouble sticking to a walk-run program. So if you can find some way of increasing adherence to what's trying to get done, it's got to be a good thing. So having options. So we shift, say, over to phase 4, 5, and 6, Eric, which are phase 4 is significant because this is where we start to, in essence, return the athlete to overground running. So full 100% body weight, overground running. Any tips, suggestions, pearls of wisdom on how we can best get the athlete running over ground again after they've cross-trained and slowly introduce some less than body weight running to this point?
Yeah, so I would always make sure they were ready for this stage. And the way we would do that is, keep in mind, we've been testing them all along, but in this case, I'm testing them and having them do some performance tests for me. Not that there's a direct correlation, but for example, it's well quoted about joint forces being 15 times body weight when you run. And yet most of us will not tell an athlete, let me see you hop on one leg down the track here 20 consecutive times, right? If they can't hop on one leg 20 consecutive times down the track, I think it's highly unlikely that they are going to bear the force of running very well and without pain, or they will modify the way they run, and then all of a sudden new pains that weren't part of the original pain start to creep in. So we would really make sure they were ready for this over ground. We would add things like jump roping first. Can they take the impact? Can they hop? Can they, if they were trail runners, can they actually change direction without having increased pain, right? Because trail running requires a little more agility than track running or than running straight ahead. And so we would know that they were ready to do all of this stuff as much as we could before we would return them to overground running.
So just like an athlete returning from an ACL injury, there's commonly utilized known benchmarks of performance that we like to see, symmetry between limbs with all different types of tests, if you like. This is applicable to the running athlete as well. Don't just turn it on because X amount of weeks have turned past. Have a look at some of these attributes and think about the mechanics of running. It's a single leg sport. Hopping is a great one, as you say, 20 hops up the corridor or hopping on the spot for 30 seconds or whatever it may be. So assuming the athletes pass some of these tests, they start 100% body weight running over ground. Anything else to consider other than titrating out their minutes of exposure over said period of time?
Yeah, I think same thing is pain, irritability, and in most competitive runners, monitoring them closely that they won't do too much. Because at this point, they have reached nirvana, so to speak. They're back to running over ground. It's the thing they most craved. And so, they may go for that limited run and have no pain and say, well, and this wouldn't be, I know the mindset of competitive runners now and how they think. Like, for me as a basketball player, a 5-mile run was a long run. Like, why would you run that far as a basketball player? So that seemed like it was forever. But these folks will say, well, I felt good after 30 minutes, so I ran another hour and a half. I'm like, you ran an hour so you've run 2 hours total with your first time back to running, and now you have pain again. So that's the other thing I would have to be careful with is once they hit overground running, they're like, whoa, the shackles are off. We're ready to go.
Oh gosh, and we're all laughing because we've probably all been there ourselves, or we've certainly seen it over the years. So it's something I try and remind the runner of, Eric, is sort of terming it tissue conditioning work. This is tissue conditioning. This is not yet fitness training. This is not the sexy stuff. Yes, it's exciting. It's a step in the right direction, but don't get too far ahead of yourself just yet.
Yes, that is a great reminder to them, and good for you.
But working with particularly the competitive athlete, they want to get going. Any tips on how to, in essence, slow them down, have them buy into this stepwise progression at this point versus becoming overzealous? Is it just education, relationship? What's the glue?
I think you're tossing me a softball here because I think you know the answer. But the answer is you should have developed over time this relationship. The big phrase used now is Therapeutic Alliance, right? Which has been in psychology for decades, but the physiotherapists are now using this term. And in a nutshell, what that means is you and your athlete and your coach and everybody else are on the same page with regard to where we are physically, where we are psychosocially. And so then a trust is built. And if they trust you, you can say things like exactly what you said. Look, we are back to running, but you cannot exceed. You have to stick with the plan. The plan is working so far. And if you haven't developed that relationship, then they tend to experiment more because they feel like they know themselves best. And there is some truth to that. Athletes know themselves better than anyone else does. But if they've developed that therapeutic alliance, that trust, that relationship, then I think that's the secret to the sauce, that you have to have treated them well and shown success up to that point, and then they will adhere more. My impression of working with runners is they still, I know you said 35, but I thought maybe 45. You know what I mean? They'll still push the envelope a little, but if I can get them to be reasonable about pushing that envelope, I'm okay with that. I really am. I'm okay with a confidence interval around that 30 minutes, if you will. Maybe a little under if you were hurting, maybe a little more if you were feeling good, but the confidence interval should be limited.
I find it's a little sneaky trick that I've adopted over the years is that confidence interval, that range. You can do this between this and this, knowing that they'll always choose that higher level, but they've got some buy-in, some say, right?
Yes.
In terms of adding in intensity running, this program, this show, Eric, has certainly highlighted this across different colleagues of yours, such as Stu Warden there in the US, who shared around the effect of intensity on the magnitude of bone loading and therefore the heightened risk of potential bone stress injury. It's something I've had to work through with multiple bone stress injuries in recent times, is really appreciating that even a slight increase in intensity changes the overall workload, as we've already discussed today. Tips that you can share around how to add intensity and ensure that things don't go south.
That is always a tough one. Again, you've noted that you who in your physiotherapy and exercise physiology brain know better. There's a very primal sort of lizard brain that likes to compete, and I think all you can do is, as much as possible, keep that athlete in the moment, keep them into body awareness, and the effect that their intensity is having on not only their symptoms, which are largely now disappearing by this phase, but also on their general health, happiness, muscle soreness, ability to sleep well, all of those things. I try to just keep them aware again of the big picture and away from a very natural thing with runners, which is, I did this workout in 5 minutes and 35 seconds last time. This time has to be 5:30 or better. I don't think you have to PR every time out. And I think I try to keep them away from that focus and onto the bigger picture.
Gosh, that's so powerful. It doesn't have to be a PR every workout compared to what you did last time. There can't be linear progressions. There just can't be. There's going to become a finite point where that's no longer achievable. So I think that's such a great point, Eric. And then, you're right that if an athlete can complete workouts, obviously this is over a process of time, then they should be considering participation in competition again.
That's exactly right. And as you noted, big difference between participation, and that is, hey, I'm back with my team. Hooray, I'm back with my group that I run with. That's fantastic, because psychologically, that's a wonderful thing. That is not return to competition. Return to competition is a different animal. And there is still a way to go there to get to competition form. But again, I would argue, if I view this paper as a linear progression, and therefore I will have waited till they've returned to participation to start thinking about return to competition, I have already failed my athlete. I should be thinking about return to competition in phase 1 of this, where you are thinking, okay, what is their competition? What do they like to do? They're a middle distance runner. So I need to do short, intense bouts of cross training to mentally ready them for return to competition. You should be thinking about that from the get-go and not wait until the end. And I think I see that too much as people get very linear with their thinking here and are saying, well, okay, you've returned to participation now. You don't need to see me anymore. You just go ahead and train with your team, and eventually you'll get ready to go. And I'm not saying that the physio can't let go a little bit and put it more in the hands of the coach at some point. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying if you've waited that long and then all of a sudden you lose track of your athlete, there is a large step between return to participation and return to competing. And that large step, you begin to fill that gap on day 1 of rehab.
Yeah, so it has to start, as you say, day 1, thinking about the competition schedule, the goals, that goal setting, not just by happenstance as you see fit along the journey. And certainly that, so almost like an early discharge, in quotes, lazy approach. Okay, you seem happy now. You seem happy. We're done. And it's not about over-servicing a patient, heaven forbid, but it's about, as you said at the start, making sure there's a good outcome here.
Right. That's exactly right. And I do think that lazy approach stems from the day where, and we weren't the only ones, as physios, we weren't the only ones. Surgeons thought this too. When you looked at outcomes after total knee replacement, for example, they would issue a questionnaire that was largely about pain and range of motion. And once that was good, then the outcome was great and done. And I think physios fall into that trap too. Okay, they're running again. There's no pain. Their form is pretty solid here. We're all done. And I would say that we're not all done. You know what I mean? And again, to go back to the total knee replacement example, once we started measuring speed of gait, how fast they could complete a walking trial and how fast patients could go up and down stairs after their total knee replacement, the outcomes were subpar at best. You had a pain-free person who could not participate in daily life, right? So I think we have to think differently about these running athletes. And that's the point of the example, is that returning to competition is why they came to you in the first place. And now you've abandoned them right at the pivotal last step. I just think that's not the pattern we want to fall into.
Yeah, let's not forget the demands of running are very high. I often say it's different to walking the dog. And right. Everyone loves walking the dog. I saw a patient recently, Eric, who had ruptured his Achilles tendon with a therapist, discharged him from care without him even being able to hop or being assessed for a hop to return to running, playing football. And it's just kind of like, gosh, that's a big leap.
Yes.
It happens. Eric, in the sort of closing time we have, psychological readiness of the injured athlete, you've touched on it already, but one of the really great takeaways from this paper is on page, I think it's 17 or it's at the back of the paper, but it's a table 4, page maybe 15, 16, 14, but it's suggested psychosocial outcome measures. Now, we're not going to pull these out for every patient, of course, but any experience with utilising these for athletes, or is it okay to get a bit of a subjective feel based on the relationship, know that they're anxious, know that they're frustrated, when to use these outcome measures or not?
I think it's okay to use that subjective approach. Of all those outcomes measures listed there, and look, that's just a small sample. There are dozens of these things, but only one, oddly, with all of the people running and all of the running athletes we work with, it was a small sample size, which was the ESSIS, the self-efficacy scale, the endurance self-efficacy scale. I think that's what it's called, ESSIS for short. That's the only one that was actually validated in runners. The rest of them have been validated in other populations. And so we have an ongoing study right now to try to validate that. One of the other ones in there called the PRIA-RS with endurance runners. And then I'm borrowing this from my experience as a musculoskeletal physical therapist. There is a measure, a proxy measure called SANE, Single Assessment Numeric Evaluation. And it just goes like this. On a 0 to 100% scale, 0 being not ready at all and 100% being fully ready to return, how ready are you to return to competition? And then they just give you a number. And what you find out is, and again, we're trying to validate this now, but in many orthopedic populations, so those with shoulder pain, those with knee pain, those with ankle pain, if you look up the SANE, S-A-N-E, it will say that this one numeric measure correlated very well with the outcomes of these more complex 12, 15, 18, 25 question measures, right? So I really lean on that question if I don't have time for them to fill out a longer scale. And so that plus the subjective part, your expertise that you've acquired working with that person of how ready they are.
What a great tip there, Eric. Use the SANE evaluation method. It's one question on a scale of 0 to 100. How ready are you to return to competition? Not ready, 0. Fully ready, 100%.
Right. And you can vary that, right? You can change it by saying, how confident are you, 0 to 100%? How fearful are you, 0 to 100%? Right. And so then you can get by varying that question just a little, you can start to get a more nuanced picture maybe of that athlete. That's an easy one for me to use on a consistent basis, actually all throughout from the first step, because we can do that weekly. I can just start off, hey, how are things going? How are you feeling? Is the injury still bothering you? How are you feeling? On a 0 to 100% scale, where do you think you are as return to competition? And of course, in the beginning, it'll be, 10%, maybe even 5%. And then you can watch that progress over time. And I don't tell them what their previous score was, right? Because that institutes bias. I just let them each week re-rate from scratch.
Yeah, just get that gut read, subjective, but it's insightful and some powerful numeric that you can work off. Tells you so much. Eric, every guest of the show gets issued 2 set questions, and we might keep the first one topic specific. So we're discussing return to running for the running-based athlete. If you could boil everything you've learned through your extensive clinical career, academic career contribution into one piece of advice to help the athlete return to running successfully, what would Professor Hegedus's single piece of advice be?
Find a team that specializes in running and trust them.
Find a team that specializes in running and trust them.
Yeah, no offense to the generalist physiotherapist. I get it. But runners have a unique sport that requires lots of suffering to get better. So they don't always pay attention to musculoskeletal suffering. They also are highly motivated. And if you've not dealt with the mindset of what it means to be a runner and to love that sport, you are not going to be as good at rehabilitating them as somebody who works with that population on a regular basis. And so I think you look for someone like yourself, like Brian Heiderscheit, who you mentioned before, that you say, these guys work with these sorts of athletes every day, and it's no different than a surgeon you would go to, right? Are you going to go to the person who does general surgery to have your ACL repaired, or are you going to the person that repairs 1,000 of them a year? Probably the person that repairs 1,000 of them a year.
Practical but powerful tip there, Eric. Every guest gets the challenge of issuing our listenership, Eric, with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Professor Hegedus's physical challenge going to be?
Oh, okay. Oh, this is great. All right. So the physical challenge for the week is going to be 15 minutes of interval jump roping. 15
minutes of interval jump roping. So I think the key word there was interval, right?
Right. So that would be in that 15 minutes, an easy minute, a hard minute, an easy minute. Just alternate them.
Easy, hard for
15 minutes. And see what be ready for the muscle soreness. See what your Achilles and calf muscles feel like the next day. And certainly if you have Achilles tendinopathy, this isn't the challenge for you.
Yeah. But just to clarify, easy is still skipping or jump roping?
Yes.
But
still skipping.
When you say go, hard, it's faster, right?
Yeah, it's as hard as you feel like you can go.
Yep, for 15 minutes. And if you take this challenge on, do report on your DOMS, delayed onset of muscle soreness, to Professor Eric over at Twitter at Hegedus, Hegedus 44 on Twitter. So let's bombard your account with our feedback.
That would be great.
But in all seriousness, Eric, thank you for your contribution to the show on this expert edition, but also the wider field of musculoskeletal medicine and sports. It's extensive and ongoing, so thank you.
What a fabulous show you're doing. Again, I told the others too, our research actually reaches relatively far fewer people than your podcast. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion like this for a larger audience to hear, because ultimately that's why we write these papers, or I do, because I'm frustrated with clinical practice. And it's the same answer I gave as to why I want to get into PT school all those years ago. I want to help people. And so podcasts like this are helping people and helping us reach a greater number. So thank you so much for doing this. Don't underestimate your contribution to the health of the world. It's really important stuff you're doing.
Thank you, Eric. It makes the late evenings worthwhile with US time zone connections. but Eric, thank you very much. And we look forward to a return visit sometime on the show.
That'd be fantastic. We'll talk about construct-based exercise prescription for physios next time.
All right. That's I'm putting that on the list. Thank you, Eric.
All right. Good talking with you.
So there you have it, another expert edition of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust you enjoyed Professor Hegedus's share-ins. If you did, then jump over and please let Eric know what it was that you enjoyed. You'll find Eric over on Twitter at Hegedus44. That's the numerics 44. Hegedus. Or do let Eric know if you take on that skipping physical challenge for the week. Now, as you heard at the top of the show, our 2022 Dr. Stephen Seiler live stream is fast approaching. This is a must-attend event for endurance coaches, practitioners, and athletes worldwide. Dr. Stephen Seiler is the forefather of the polarized training approach, and to have Dr. Seiler share his knowledge with us is such a rare treat. Now, you can pick up your tickets over at physicalperformanceshow.com, our new website, from just $49 per person. Remember, tickets include a copy of Dr. Seiler's presentation via PDF and also a post-event recording so that you can learn on demand anytime you like, or as a surrogate if you are unable to attend the live stream time-in, which is 3 to 6 p.m. on the 2nd of April 2022. Once again, jump over to physicalperformanceshow.com. Of course, our patrons of the show, you'll receive your code to receive complimentary access to this live stream. And if you'd like to become a patron of the show, jump over to physicalperformanceshow.com, hit the Patreon tab, and there you can pledge your support from just $5 per month and receive complimentary access to not only our upcoming live streams, such as Dr. Stephen Seiler, but also our backdated catalogue of live stream events. A massive thanks, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible: Daryl Misson, audio engineering; Susan Wilkin, show administration; Matthew Olding, show graphic design. You'll find the Physical Performance Show over on YouTube now, including video episodes of our guests. Do keep the podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode that you've been enjoying. They are always a whole lot of fun. Tag the show in at Physical Performance Show. You'll find me over on social, also at Brad_Beer. Now we have a smorgasbord of highs, lows and learnings coming your way, including next week's expert edition guest, return guest of the show, Dr. Dan Plews, who will share around a very important topic, and that is heart rate variability. It has been an overdue expert edition, but get set next week to learn about the what, when and how of heart rate variability in terms of your training, health and performance. And as always, a huge thank you once again to our show partners, Polar. If you believe it's time to beat your best, then do shop Polar, polar.com. Be sure to check out the V2 Vantage Shift, my personal favourite. And if you're looking for a headphone upgrade and sick of your headphones going flat or falling out, jump over and check out earshots.com. Use the code PERFORMANCE for 10% off. So until next week, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.